Welcome to Safe Havens 2020, happening in Mexico City. This session is virtual, but we expect this to be quite interactive and interesting for everyone participating. My name is Jude Dibia. I'll be hosting this session. And for the guests, we have Syowia Kyambi from Kenya, or is it Nairobi? Yeah. And also we have Dr. Pure, a Nigerian artist as well. Safe Havens has become this very multicultural meeting space for freedom fighters and activists. And when we first started about 10 years ago, it was a small thing where the main question was, how do we provide a sort of safe space for artists to be able to practice their art and speak freely, and also to share their work. In time, Safe Haven has taken up a different connotation, especially with what's going on in the world today. Do you have artists fleeing their countries for shelter? We have artists being imprisoned or killed. And so it becomes important to understand the importance of art. And in the same space, you begin to question what makes art dangerous. Should art be dangerous? And I remember while we were planning this session and discussing with ourselves, some of you panelists were very, suspect of the word dangerous. Like, why should you call it danger? But when you view the fact that people are being killed for their art, people are being persecuted or censored, it begins to make sense. And so from a time as far back as, the 50s, the 60s, and if you use Fela as an example of this, we artists have found a way to use our art to probably enliven society, to make aware, to wake up certain kind of passions in people, to make them much more attuned to what's happening in their environment. We have different issues that people focus on. It could be inequality, it could be racism, it could be the concept of colonization and what it has done to a continent like Africa, Australia, or even North America. It could be different things, and it could mean different things to different people. So today, we will be chatting with two very accomplished artists and also trying to find out how they contextualize this word art and danger and what it is that their art means to everyone within their own society and globally. But before we do that, I would like us to sit back, relax, and watch a couple of clips from our artists and listen to their words. And then we will query them and have them unpack everything we've just seen. So we welcome you again to Safe Havens of 2022. And we hope you enjoy this session and also take away certain ideas and concepts. And also we hope you can also raise your hands if you're there and let us know what you think about some of these insights and ideas that we've put forward. So I would hand back to the studios and have them show the film. We'll be starting with Syowia's work and then Dr. Pure's. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Syowia Kyambi, and I would like to share with you two different works to aid in our conversation. The first is titled I've Heard Many Things About You, which is an installation and a performance, which I did in Bremen, Germany in 2016, and was most recently showed at the Kenya Pavilion for the Venice Biennale. I walked through the city of Bremen, Germany, for 4.5 hours, wearing a Herero dress, which is used today to commemorate the genocide the Germans committed in Namibia between 1904 and 1908. Bremen is a city where Adolf Luderitz was born. You can see a photograph of the now abandoned Luderitz town, Namibia, taken by Mohammed Amin in the 80s. Luderitz was responsible for the extraction of materials from Namibia during colonial rule. The fabric I carry is stitched together, consisting of images taken by photojournalist Mohammed Amin in Namibia during the 80s, and excerpts of letters written by Henrik Witbooi to the German and British government. Witbooi is a Namibian chief who was persecuted due to his resistance to colonial rule. This is the report I used in my research. It is thought of that this genocide was the precursor or the testing ground for the Holocaust. Both Britain and Germany were involved in controlling the region in the 1900s. The excerpt is written by British government kind of as a document against the Germans. For the walk, I embraced the energy of Witbooi's daughter, Margaret. She was murdered by a German general. They were kind of hunting for Witbooi because obviously killing Witbooi would show their power. Both British and German generals were doing this. And Witbooi was constantly escaping, and she was caught in the midst of this. And there's a quote that I found, which I found very powerful, and I kind of felt like I could utilize her energy for the performative element of the work. Let me just read the quote for you. "I've heard that you've come from over the sea in ship in order to make war on my father. Today the victory is on your side, but luck is changeable, and if you will take my advice, you will return to your own homes, because before long my father will come down on you like a lion and take his revenge." Just to give it a little bit of context, the estimation of her age was between 16 and 17 years old. So I thought it was so powerful for a teenager in that time who hadn't come across gunpowder weaponry to kind of also stand up to this general. I just found it incredibly powerful. I walked from the Ethnographic Museum past the train station through a part of the city built using the resources provided for by colonization, stopping by a church, passing Bismarck Monument, and leading to the contemporary gallery in Bremen called the Städtische Galerie Bremen. I use a golden string to highlight the different parts of the text element in the work, things like the year, 1904, like Henrik Witbooi's name, excerpts from his letter, kind of like a highlighter. And the installation itself consists of like rope, which is tied using the hangman's noose, attached to weighing scales, kind of the weighing scales you'd use in a market a long time ago to weigh vegetables or meat products. And the costume that I wear that commemorates the genocide, which is worn today, is suspended on a clothes hanger. And I don't perform the performance in different cities, it's only for Bremen. And the installation then can travel along with a video of the performance as a final output. The side underneath is created by patching different pieces of fabric together. The second work I'd like to share is called Kasper's Playground. It's an installation as well as a performance and can also exist as a multiple channel video. Nyayo House was built in 1983 and is the Office of Immigration in Kenya. This is where you get your passport and immigration papers. I can't perform or film in this area, so created a puppet for my character called Kasperle, which is a character I've created that is a trickster character who deals with things that are hard to hear or hard to talk about. For 24 years, during the second president of Kenya's rule, Daniel Arap Moi, the basement of Nyayo House was used as a torture chamber. Kasperle's Playground unpacks this time period and commemorates the mothers' protests of 1992. The mothers were fighting for the release of their sons who were in captivity in Nyayo House. During this protest, the mothers stripped naked as a last resort on the 10th day of protests. This is when the police walked away. It's deemed as a curse to see a mother naked. The work has two projections, and Kasperle as a character, which is an animal, human, male, female, enters the space and looks for Nyayo House in order to disassemble Nyayo House. The puppet is used to help Kasperle break down Nyayo House, and in the course of that gets broken and Kasperle fixes the puppet. There's a lot of breakage and repair and breakage that takes place in my practice. Kasperle then finds themselves in the midst of this protest. And the character Kasperle transforms and becomes, I guess, myself, protesting in remembrance or in honorance of the mother's protest. I wash the remnants of Kasperle's red ochre from my body at the very end, using the Kenyan flag. And the remnants of the performance are left in the form of an installation with the puppet hanging and the shadows and projections, along with the costume of Kasperle and the costume that I wear that commemorates the mother's protest.
Wow. This is the third time I have to watch that presentation. I'm always wowed by it. Particularly, what I sensed from your work, Syowia, was it's weighed down by a lot of painful history. And in a way, it's kind of like an educational piece. It doesn't just walk you through history. It, enlightens people of a certain part of our history that people don't talk about. I know that you mentioned something, especially in the second one, where you said you created the character, the shadowy character, as a way to express things that are hard to hear and things that are very difficult to talk about as well. I would like you to first probably give us your take on the Berlin experiment that you did. What was the reception of your work when you took it there?
Yeah, hi, thanks. No, even rewatching for me, there's a lot of like elements and bits to that story that need more clarification, and we can get into that a bit later. In Bremen, it was only in 2015 when I started the making of that work that Germany was actually starting to having to deal with its history with Namibia, because some human remains were found in a museum in America, which were then identified as having come from Germany and were Namibian remains. So kind of, it's strange that as I was making this work, also on the scene, like Namibia has now been pushing for the return of these remains and also for like full acknowledgement, which only took place in 2021. That tends to happen often in my practice as well. I was doing a previous work called Fracture. We didn't have enough time to kind of share about Fracture, which has got to do with Kenya's colonial history. And again, at the time I started to work on that back in 2010 or 9, the Kenyan veterans, 4 veterans were applying for restitution from the UK, which again, they also only received, I think in 2014 or 15. So somehow the making of the work and these public events are weirdly enough coming about at the same time. Yes, I totally agree with you that my work is educational. I'm very much interested in discourse, and there's always kind of a strange positioning for myself in terms of being positioned in the art world and being positioned inside of museum spaces. Bremen, the work in Bremen, I've heard many things about you, was obviously done in the street of Bremen and has a different kind of activation because it's on the street. but a lot of my practice takes place inside of museums. And then I'm like, well, like, who is this really speaking to? And maybe that's another kind of conversation we can.
Yeah, but when you walk through the streets in Bremen, were there people that were like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. No, there was a football match that day as well. So there's quite a number of like drunk people on the street.
Yes.
There was one guy in this particular section of Bremen called Böttcherstraße, which has become like super high-end tourism boutique shops, and is also a tourism destination where they have like tours, but in very narrow streets and little like fancy pubs, kind of iconized as wonderful in Bremen, moneyfied through this tourism industry that is around it. But it's in the front of it. When you enter, there's actually a how do you say, like a golden relief that was donated or like given to Hitler, like a present of the city, which apparently he may or may not have liked so much. There was something wrong with that, but it's kind of like this idolized space. And it's all built from colonial finances.
I'm a bit curious about your state of mind when you do this.
Finished. Like when I was entering that space, there's a guy who's like, "Oh, was für ein Scheiß ist denn das?" You know, like, what kind of shit is this? There was a woman who drove her bicycle over the work. And that can happen. It's 14 meters long. I was expecting somebody to end up stepping on it or you know, interfering with it by accident, not necessarily on purpose. And it was a red light stop, and it was a lot of work to gather the material at the red light stop so that, you know, people could move around it. But she drove right over it. And then I thought, oh, she'd probably be like, oh shit, and get off of it at the red light stop, but she didn't. And she sat on it. So I ended up going on all fours. And I went around her bicycle super slowly at the red light stop, and then lifted the back of her wheel and pulled off the fabric. And then like a few minutes after that, there was a young boy who was cycling, saw me coming and got off the bike and stood next to his bike, you know, straight back. And I was like, okay, like in my mind, I was like, oh, there's hope. this older woman in her 50s couldn't get off her bike, you know. But did you feel a sense of danger or fear? Like, what if I come across some skinheads or something like that? No. I think at the time, when I perform, it's not me who's performing. It is, but it's not. There's another energy and another entity. Okay. And like I said in the presentation, it was really Henrik Whitboy's daughter's energy that I kind of tapped into.
Exactly.
Because I found her so powerful, and also it's a female energy I can relate to, and I kind of channel that. And often people don't recognize me.
They see the character itself.
Something else is and of course people are worried, but then there's also I don't know, there's a power in the element of surprise. There's a power in the element of people not knowing what's really going on. And then I had a lot of people following me for a long distance, sometimes the whole way through. And some people would come and go. And some people were part of the group exhibition that I was part of. So I kind of had a support structure around me as well.
Okay. But let's move to the other installation work that you did. That was almost cringing to watch and to know the background history, because after I saw your piece, when you sent it to us, I actually went and Googled just to read up a bit of this history and realized that I myself, as educated as I thought I was, had no idea of some of this particular stories that are part of our own history as Africans. Tell me about that one and the reception in your home country, and what the government or anyone of authority has had to say about this.
The original idea was to actually perform this in a bar, and it's a bar called Legends, which is near the town I live in, Rongai. Legends is a super famous bar. It's an old school bar. It existed in the 70s. I really wanted to perform it there. This was just in the beginning of 2020, and actually had done the homework to perform it there, but then the pandemic hit and we couldn't perform it in the bar anymore. So it's still tabled as a place to perform this work, mostly because a bar is where all the politics get spoken about.
Yeah.
It's also the place where also informants are also waiting to see what the political climate is, what people are talking about. And there, if I perform it there, we did have in play like 5 male friends who'd have to be in the bar pretty close to me because I'm actually nude and stripping.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I get away with things because I'm also perceived as white in Kenya. I'm half German, half Kenyan, and my whiteness is an immediate like readability. There's a play I can play with getting away with certain behaviors.
Exactly.
And it's excused because I'm not a fully Kenyan. And then it depends on where you go and what homework you did. You know, if you approach the chief and you explain the work and they approve of the work and they are aware of the work, most of the time when you do that due diligence, you can actually get away with I feel like I could get away with making this work. I have to perform it now next year for the first time in Nairobi. I've performed it in Malta, which is they have similar constructs with Kenya in terms of the history of Malta, in terms of colonization, also in terms of nudity and this kind of resistance to nudity. And there the process of, the space was very concerned about the naked part and was like, oh, we have to put up partitions in case somebody who didn't come for the performance stumbles upon it.
Exactly.
I'm like, well, that's the whole point. But, you know, there was that whole kind of conversation, which I would imagine I would have in Kenya as well when I perform it next year. I'm performing it inside of a non-commercial art space.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on where you're performing. If the bar to the art space are 2 completely different beasts.
Yeah.
And I don't think my window for performing this work is closing, is my feeling. Because the government has changed. I think the most politically vocal, like people could speak their minds, was in Kibaki's era, which is the 3rd president of Kenya. And it's slowly changing back to olden days where you couldn't speak so vocally about the government or the country. That freedom of expression is shifting.
Yeah.
And I think the window is about like 6 months to 9 months. And then I don't know if I'll be able to perform Kasperle's Playground in the same way that I feel I could have done it. Or when I was doing it.
But
funny thing is, Moy died in 2020.
Yes.
So I was writing about this work and the next day he was announced dead.
Okay.
So there's also a shift in terms of like what's possible with him now no longer living, what kind of dialogue is possible. And then the museums of Kenya have tried to make the basement of Nyayo House into a memorial site. And those discussions stopped. There was an attempt by the government in that time to actually erase the evidence of the torture chamber. But because the building was built in 1970, was thought of in 1979, which is my birth year, and then built in 1983, the basement, the structural support is part of the whole building.
Okay.
So they couldn't actually erase the evidence. And then there's one very good report written by the Human Rights Commission with it's not authored. I think that's for safety reasons, but it is available online and you can find it. And it's like 80 pages and it's got several witness accounts. And then there's a lot of information on YouTube of witness, which like survivors who have given their accounts. And I spent about 2 weeks listening to those, but then it was also it was too, I had to stop.
Yeah, it's a bit much. It's for anyone to even listen to, must be much. Yeah.
Maybe lastly, just to mention, there's a young generation of Kenyans who have no idea about Nyayo House. So my generation, I'm 43.
Yeah.
And the generation older than me, we would all we walk into town and if you don't have to go to Nyayo House, you'd avoid it. And you actually walk like a block around that building. And the building is opposite Uhuru Park, which is a landmark park for all of our protests and freedom. Uhuru means freedom, and for all kind of activities to do with politics. It's really like base. It's also like one of the few parks in the city that are green spaces that everybody goes to. If the Pope comes to Kenya, he will speak at Uhuru Park. It's kind of this massive green space, which is right opposite Nyayo House. So there's a strange juxtaposition. And the protests that the mothers did took place in that park. And also this happened at the same time as the Saba movement, which was a push for multipartyism in Kenya. So there was a lot of movement for rights and freedoms that were taking place at that time that coincided with this mother's protest. And there's a generation of youth in their like 30 and younger who don't know about Nyayo House having torture chambers. They have no clue.
That's so sad. I mean, do they not teach that in history classes?
No, this is not taught in our Kenyan education system. We don't talk about Nyayo House. It's like
interesting. I mean, we have something similar back home as well. But when we have a bigger conversation, I would like to tap into your awesome sense of self-awareness, because you said something that piqued my interest. If they didn't perceive you as white, your reception in your own home country would have been a bit different. Because
navigation of the kind of work I do would be completely different. I would have to handle that completely differently. Absolutely.
Exactly. So we will talk about that when we resume our wider discussion. But
I've learned to play with that now, with also my colleagues. We've learned to really play, and I can give you one nice antidote is I'm building a space, a residency space with 2 other artists. We co-founded the space. It's called Untethered Magic. It's a sanctuary for artists, basically, to come and not necessarily have to do anything. They could just come and have time out. That's the objective of Untethered Magic. And when we're building these small structures, and the people who are delivering sand and stones and whatnot think that the guys who I co-founded the space with are like employed by me. I'm this big white boss. So when they deliver the sand, and mind you, we're on a tight budget, always sleeping everywhere for money, and then they give him a tip to say thank you for the contact, and he comes back and is like, "Yay, we have 1,000 shillings. We can buy one more thing." We've learned how to play with these dynamics. And also when we're driving around somewhere and we get stared at because our constellation is so strange. We're not married. There's my son is in the picture in the back of a car. The picture does not fit the norm. And we've stared at, and my good friend Kibe, who's also the co-founder, he just says, "Oh, prehistoric site, watch out, Syowia. We're now in prehistoric site." Because somebody's just staring, and like maybe 20 years ago I would get upset about this, but now I have to laugh. I mean, nobody's paying my hospital bills.
Exactly. Well, and anyway, thank you so much, Syowia, for actually telling us a bit about your work, but we're going to come back to it again. And we move to Dr. Pure, but before I have a conversation with you, Dr. Pure, we'd like to see some of your work as well. So studio would help us with your video.
Dr. Pure, wai tambaya na ake wai kai dan asalin ina ne? Haba Ultra, kai da zaka ce musu ni ne dan ciki original, typical dan cikin gari, original dan cikin gari, ta typical dan cikin gari, 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 original dan cikin gari, ta typical dan cikin gari, dan cikin gari, dan cikin gari, dan cikin gari. Yeah, Dr. P-U-R to the E, DJ Blandon, at it once again. Yeah, ambition. Dr. P-U-R to the E, ambition. Yeah, I've got ambition. Gaganga zokumore, gawanga ganga zokumore, 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 zokumore. Okay. Zokumore, 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 zokumore. Yo, God. I am more, I'm feeling calm. You know me now, I'm the big young number. I'm feeling the border, feeling the song. Run, down the road, keep it on. The party is too cold, this nigga now. I'm never feeling, but ain't the kids, I couldn't see how that what it now? We all on the level, so
The smile in your presence, the backbite in your absence. They all want to see you go down.
Yes, kana wanda bo ko da me ka zo an fika live and direct da man ya kamata lokaci yayi da zamu san man nawa da duniya Kano da akwai artist
gaskiya ne
na je wurare da yawa the first thing da ake tambaya ta wai a Kano da akwai artist Kano da akwai artist to shi sa muka ce ko yes lokaci yayi da ya kamata mu haɗa kanmu mu fara yin abubuwan da zai ƙara haskaka wa duniya da akwai mu.
Wato mun sani kuma da akwai mutane da dama da suka sani mun juma muna mafarkin irin wannan lokacin ya zo kuma yanzu lokaci ya zo ba abin da ke faranta mana ciki kamar matasan nan da kuke tasowa gaskiya Allah ya taimake ku an Allah da wahalar da muka sha ba ta banza ba ce ba yes ai tare muna manne waye ne muna tare sau DJ bismillah
Kaji wai suka manta sai a wai da wa suka zanta ba mu ne masu kada hanta mutum ko aljanni gaba da gabanta na fi so da su fuskanta ni ɗaya ba mataimaka sun biyo na guje na basu da hakki uwa a makaranta na hana su maki sun sa ni zaki uwa mata mun basu a daki ya we hustle non stop na ci come join the team korai ya baci shugaban su ba manai mai Buhari enter area maza sun rawan dari muna ta kyalli mun basu da tsatsa suna kukan karanci ba wai full of data Allah ya hore ba fusata
you know, we're not applying our trade professionally. And the funny thing is, those that know are not telling the others that don't know. And let me be honest with you, and we've come to a stage where you don't have to enroll in any institution for you to get the knowledge. The knowledge is there. We all have universities in our pockets.
Blessings, so many blessings. Trust me, I've learned lessons. So many lessons. Blessings upon blessings. So many blessings. Trust me, I've learned lessons. So many lessons. I thank Allah for the blessings. Got me and my crew saying Alhamdulillah for the lessons that made me more stronger. Kuskure, but I learn another page I turn. Every now and again you do the wrong thing. Young Adam, Tara, never goma, say musoma, say mapasa, mabagi da wasa, waze jiraka, tashi ne manaka, kanema alaka da sa'a, hadda ilimi ba sihiri, sans knowledge, living life on the streets, come across more lectures than college. There's till next week, keep it real, keep it locked. Every Tuesday, Rahama Radio 97.3 on your FM dial. It's Dr. P. You are to the give you that cure and that what? Yes, that remedy. Bless. Yeah. Big shout out to the Vibe Zone family, Vibe Nation for life. Yeah, dama an shafa damun su, gaba dan Adam da burinsa. Yes, sa kai ya fi bauta. You know what I mean? I'm
out. Okay. Thank you so much for that. Okay, there was a bit of a disturbance there, but yes, we're back. I think it was a bit of a breath of fresh air, because having watched Sharia's work, which is so heavy, it's good to have a bit something else to lighten the mood. But for people who don't have an idea of what the state of the art is, or censorship in Nigeria is when it comes to artists from the North, they would look at your videos and smile and think, oh, Nigeria seems to be a very, very hip place. People are doing their thing, not understanding that it's a structural change in how people live in Lagos, for example, and how they live up north with all the censorship and the censorship board. What I found particularly surprising about your work is the fact that, apart from the message, I don't understand Hausa though, but the little bit I got from when you were speaking English with some of your the crew and the people around you, what I got is a sense of you were also enlightening the youth on issues and knowledge, because that's one word you kept using, knowledge. The knowledge is there. Can you, before we start off anyway, give us a background to what life is like for an average artist living in the northern part of Nigeria, and why the art form that they have, i.e. music or film, could be very dangerous for them?
Yes, thank you. I think our discussions that we had previously, there's something that I mentioned that, you will not really realize how dangerous art is if you don't really, it depends what you regard art as. And I was also raised in the UK. So, coming back to Nigeria, I had this British accent. And having that British accent was a big issue for me because, growing up in the UK, I faced racism. So, I was thinking to myself, okay, now I'm going to be back in Nigeria. So at least, and I can tick, and get rid of racism, off the list. But when I came to Kano, things got worse. And in the sense of, a lot of people would not answer my greetings, and a lot of people would, not let me, mingle with their children. They'll say, I'm westernized, and I dress differently. And it's exactly like that. And when I started doing my music as well, and a lot of people felt that, I've brought something that will hinder, and their traditions, their cultures, and Kano is very conservative. It's a very conservative society. And if you go back to, during the colonial rule of the British Empire in Nigeria, you'll notice that the North was ruled indirectly through their leaders, the traditional leaders and, the religious leaders. So, it's still like that today, and it's like, if the monarchy says this or says that, then you have to follow whether you like it or not. And with music was the biggest taboo. So, it got to a point where, finding places to mingle was very difficult for me. But, and as I said, I classify art as a language, a universal language. When I came to Nigeria, and I was trying to adapt to the environment, I can honestly say it was art that, and helped me along the way, that got the artists to open up to me. It was like we all spoke that one language, and that was art, regardless of whether we were singing, rapping, dancing, doing graffiti, and so on and so forth. So a lot of artists in the North, you have a lot of artists that have talent, they have the gift, but they're scared. And it's not just from the censorship board, it's from family members, it's from the community, so on and so forth. So you've got, artists that are scared to maybe come out and perform, and record in studios because they're scared of not being included within the community, because, they're scared that they might be singled out, being artists. But that was a long time ago. But gradually, we say, and we said to ourselves, never say never, and we kept on pushing, we kept on doing it. And, and after many years and many lashes, and a lot of artists, have been accepted now, and it's not as bad as before. So in the past, even coming out to say I am a rapper, was difficult. But now, as you've seen in the clips, we hold events, and the movement is just getting bigger and bigger. You've got females now that, in the past, it would have been impossible for a female to be singing or rapping, but now, you've got a lot of females out there rapping. So it's like, being an artist in Kano, it's like treading on eggshells. You have to like be careful of everything you do, everything you say, the way you dress, and the people you even mingle with. And what I mean by that is, and we had a huge challenge of, you can't really have a concert and just have males, or just have a concert and just have females. You have to have that, the atmosphere, with the males and the females, guys coming along with their girlfriends, and parents coming along with their children. But when, like, a father will come along with his daughters, but his daughters will have to sit to one side, and he will have to sit to the other side, because that was one of the rules that were put on us, that males and females cannot mingle. So when it first all started, I thought it was a religious thing, but after a long period, and I started to realize, they're using religion, but it's not really religion. It's more of a cultural, traditional kind of thing. This is how we do it. This is how we've been doing it. And we don't want you young guys to come and change things for us. So that way they intimidate us and everything. And,
but quickly,
so on and so forth.
Your microphone, be careful. It's scratching your jacket, so it's kind of static.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, let me deal with that.
Okay, so from what I can take in, and there are 2 points of attack when it comes to being an artist in the northern part of Nigeria. And you've, more or less spoke about the fear of being viewed as too westernized. So there's that cultural aspect of it coming in. And you said things are changing, but I'd like to query that thought. In as much as things have changed, women can sing or rap, there is still a bit of that restriction or censorship of what you can sing about. And so in one of your lyrics, you were talking about the knowledge is there, but that is the very point of when an artist becomes a danger to society and to himself. I know for a fact that up north in Nigeria, there's a lot of poverty and suffering. And there's a huge divide of the rich and the poor. And then when you have an artist who is spitting out some knowledge or poetry, as I like to call it, to say, this has been going on, that's when the censorship comes in. You're not supposed to question that. So yes, you can sing, you can wear your leather jacket and jeans. However, don't sing about this topic. I mean, I'm also aware of a lot of artists from Nigeria from the northern part of Nigeria, who have been either imprisoned, who have to flee from the north to the southern part of Nigeria because of maybe a film that they took part in has been viewed as taboo. So in those respects, how is it that you can say you can be free to be an artist, but what is the limit of freedom?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because recently there were 2 artists who I had known from a young age, because one thing is, when we first started the little movement that we have here, and a lot of the artists now were usually in primary, so a lot of them grew up around us, so we know most of them. And two young artists actually did a skit around like 5 years ago. And the skit was revolving around the Kano State governor, and basically, and at that time, a video had surfaced of him taking bribes and stuffing dollars, into his clothing. And so everybody, it was a trend. Everybody was doing little comedy skits about the governor, and so it was viral. Everybody was doing it. 5 years later, they get arrested for their own video that they did mocking the governor about the dollar thing. And they got arrested and detained. And the funny thing is, we had wanted, to see a way where we can actually fight against it and against the arrest. And try and, bring an end to some of these things, because this is not the first time artists are getting arrested left, right, and center. And the funny thing is, it's not all of them that get actually media attention. A lot of the artists get arrested. And the funny thing is, even us as artists don't even know that they've been arrested. And this is what happens. You just get picked up and you don't even get charged, like the same way these young people did not get charged for almost a week. They were in a police cell. And when they finally got taken to prison and started going to court, and one of the kids' mothers, didn't agree with the not guilty plea. She just wanted to see her son out of prison, and so and obviously due to family pressure, he had to plead guilty, and pleading guilty got him 20 lashes in court. And after the 20 lashes, and he had to pay a fine. And on top of that, he also had to do community service, where he had to come to the court, sweep the court, and, clean the court toilets, basically just, and sanitize the court. And they've been doing that for a whole month now. So, and I guess, they did this to deter other artists from speaking out, because as I said, a lot, it's not just that, we're doing the music, as I said, we have a lot of artists that are speaking out. And, with the genre of music that we do, hip hop is basically, a form of self-expression. And with a lot of the things that we've been going through in the North, leading up from Boko Haram to the kidnappings, the insurgency, and and obviously you can't stop an artist from talking about his own experiences and what he's facing on a day-to-day basis. And so we have it all the time, the government. But one of the biggest issues, as I said before, is not just the government, it's also the community. And I host a radio program where I give artists an opportunity to come on my program. I speak to them and we educate each other, the listeners and the guests and everything. We talk about things because and I was fortunate to grow up in the UK, so there's a lot of things that I've experienced and a lot of opportunities that I've had in the past. And and it breaks my heart to live around these young people that never had the opportunity and never had the chance. Some of them can excel to amazing heights if given the opportunity. So I help them out. And funny enough, one day after my program, I come out and a woman parks her car, almost runs me over, parks her car, walks up to me, grabs me by my shirt, and repeatedly slaps me. Repeatedly, she slapped me almost 20 times until I couldn't handle the slaps anymore. And I was like to her, Hajami Nemiki, in Hausa, what did I do? And, she said that I interviewed her son on radio and I played his songs. She did not know that her son was an artist. And now the whole area know that her son is an artist. It's a shame to her family. I've ridiculed her,
It's
but,
the stigmatization of the,
yeah. But 10 years later, now we're very good friends, very, very good friends. And she even phones me every now and again for advice. So that's why I say, things have changed, and things are getting better, even though we have not reached the promised land yet. But it would be it would be great to actually see, and us come out and perform any type of song, record any type of track, perform anywhere without being stigmatized and being threatened.
Interesting. And Soya has actually posed the question. So can you articulate your question?
Yeah, my writing articulation is not so good. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, I was like, I guess because you're talking about the government coming at these two kids like 5 years later, and that it's systematic. systematic to make an example of them, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, the government is pretty smart because they also picked, did they pick these two because they knew enough media coverage or enough support would come because of those two particular artists? Like they knew these would create enough of a eyes on them, enough energy around them for them to then utilize. And then how confident are they to know it would go in their favor? You know, there's all these kind of systematic ways of operating that are quite surprising, and maybe you could give us more insight into the nuances of, you know, why 5 years later, why those two? Obviously there's a repercussion, and you know, how was the government so sure that it would go in their favor?
Yeah, you know, I've been asked these type of questions countless times, you know, and I tell people, and a lot of people ask me, why don't they, you know, catch you, Dr. Pio? Because I've noticed you're very outspoken, you talk a lot, you know, I've seen you at events, you know, talking to young people and, you know, saying things that you shouldn't say about the government. But the way I see it, the government don't want to arrest people like me. Because people like me will spend a few years in prison fighting a battle, you know, fighting a case against the government, regardless of whether I have to stay in prison or not. But basically, what happened is, you know, we're around the corner for an election. So it's election time, you know, and there's campaigning and everything. So I think the opposition party must have come across the video and thought to themselves, bingo. This is going to be great. Let's use this video because it's really funny and it's like reminding everybody of, you know, how the previous governor effed up. So yeah, exactly. So what they did was, you know, they started spreading it on social media, and then the video became viral again. So it becoming viral again, and the daughter of the governor, which I'm not very sure, but from what I've heard from places, the daughter of the governor had not seen the video 5 years ago, but she saw the video this time. So she was like, nope, these kids have to spend 2 years in prison, no matter what. So basically, the government had wanted to arrest them and detain them for 2 years. But luckily enough, from pressure, you know, and as I said to you before, you know, we have like a little community of artists here, you know, everybody knows everyone. So we all came together, you know, and we said, okay, you know what, this is where, you know, our numbers are going to matter. Let's start making noise on social media. So that's what we started doing. You know, we started making noise on social media. We started protesting. And Ayo, who is a blessing in disguise, you know, and also got involved. You know, I was constantly everywhere. You know, I was at the court. I went to the prison. You know, they denied me seeing them, but luckily enough, you know, and I had some prison guards who were fans. So they let me in, you know, I spoke to the warden and explained everything. And everywhere I went, you know, from the wardens to the police to, you know, the court, everybody was surprised that, you know, and why are they being arrested for this little comment 5 years later? So the government started the smear campaign, you know, and smearing the children on radio and stuff like that, saying negative things that, you know, they're going to destroy morals. Yes, because then younger generation will see videos like this and they will also continue to mock elders. But I think they realized that there's been so much pressure from us, the artists and the young people, and there was a sign that if these children actually get in prison, we're not going to give up. You know, there's going to be a bit of a problem because as some of us already started like going into the studio recording tracks. So I think they got air of that, and they decided, okay, let's not imprison them for 2 years. Instead, let's just, you know, whip them and give them a fine and send them along their way.
Okay.
And yeah, and so what they've basically been doing now is they've been getting their puppets, you know, the political puppets, to threaten us indirectly. You know, that kind of thing. Yeah, and if you go on social media, you'll see, you know, these politicians, they're little political thugs saying that, you know, we won't stand for them insulting our political leaders, you know, all of these young people, these young rappers, all of these people coming with things that, you know, we don't know, you know, this is not our culture, it's not our tradition. We're going to deal with all of these influencers, you know, stuff like that. But you know, we've seen this time and time again, so it's nothing new to us, you know.
The thing I've noticed, sorry to cut you short, the thing I've noticed between both your work extensively is it kind of takes us back to the theme of the Safe Havens 2022. You've both found ways to resist in the sense of you understand the pressures and the dangers of presenting your work, but you found a way around that. You've resisted censorship, you've resisted to be silenced. And you've also reimagined the way you produce, or the way you reach out to your communities as well. Now, I was going to go on the third part of the theme, which discusses restoration. You know, having done all of that, and both of you, any of you can answer, what is the next step? What are your ideas of danger and art? I remember in one of our meetings, so you said art is not supposed to be dangerous, or art isn't dangerous. But listening to both of you and seeing how you've managed to, you know, navigate the cultural I call it stepping stones that you've had in both your countries regarding art, and the privileges that you both have. One, Dr. Pure, you've gotten the diasporic interest as well, because you've practiced music out of your country, you've come back, you're well educated, you're very well exposed. And Syowia as well, you've used your whiteness to your own advantage when it suits a situation, because of course you need to create more awareness. So how do both of you feel if the coins were flipped, if Syowia, if you were purely white or if you were purely Kenyan, how would you have done what you're doing currently? And the same thing with Dr. Pure, if you've grown up solely in Nigeria as an artist, how do you think you would have been able to inspire other artists? And I don't think, you know, half the time, most artists don't go into the arts because they want to be activists. It's just you practice art for art's sake, and then people read all sorts of meaning to your art, and then you create awareness and a voice. But the thing I've noticed about artworks and art as a whole, from writers, musicians, filmmakers, journalists, is the sense of they bring a certain level of awareness to society. And that's when the part of educating and knowledge sharing becomes quite important. But like I said, if things were different, if you were solely white, or if you were solely Black, how would your work have been interpreted, and what kind of advantage or disadvantage would you have had? So we start with you, and then we'll move, and you can have, both of you can have a conversation as well. Yeah. I would like to see you query each other's work. Yeah.
Well, I can also relate to you, Dr. Pure, in terms of, like, you know, coming with a British accent and having that dynamic and that problem. And also in terms of, you know, people don't often, when they approach me with my mixed race heritage, a lot of the time people don't, you know, I often re-ask the same question that I'm being asked back to my questioner. And a lot of the time people are like, oh, yeah, okay, I might be coming from parents, yes, I might be Black, but I actually have two different cultures, because one parent is Kikuyu and the other one is Kamba, and those are very different cultural backgrounds. And actually, oh, I could actually speak about this, navigating these two cultures. It's just not, it's not ingrained in people's psyche. And the other thing that's been, I think, embedded in our, like, human consciousness, like, or lack of it, is this idea that we originate from one place. It's an absolutely ridiculous notion. Human beings have been moving and migrating for centuries. we're not coming from a single source. I kind of feel like that came along with when the borders started coming. These invisible borders appeared that didn't make sense for us, and these boundaries came that don't make sense for us, that we didn't actually create. And there's a nationalism and has to have this singular identity attached to it, which then it's a political vehicle, and that's just a completely ridiculous notion. People have been moving and migrating and mixing ages ago. That's it, number one. Number two, I absolutely cannot tell you what kind of artwork I would be making if I was somebody else, because I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. And my origins of making, like talking 20 years ago, or like even pre-professional art, they are rooted in what I'm engaged with in my environment and where my parents come from. And I sometimes I'm like, oh, for fuck's sakes, let me get over this fucking colonial shit. Like, I'm tired of making this work and keeping on making this work. Like, what are we doing? You know, I get those moments, and it's not by chance that I'm in this mission of making this kind of work. The conditions that both of my parents were brought into this world in it's no wonder they joined forces, and it's no wonder that my topics are related, because I've got two massive historical references. One is the Second World War, and the other one is colonization, that have impacted the entire world. So it's obvious that I'd be working with these materials in such a way. My older works were very autobiographical. Sorry, my dogs. My older works were super biographical, and I feel like I had to do that work. There's a particular one called Woman, Fräulein, Damsel and Me, which actually is in two phases. Oh, I'm sorry. Engaging entrapment and release. And the whole piece is called Woman, Fräulein, Damsel and Me. I actually produced it right after, in 2007 to 2009. It took like 2 years. And the previous piece, which was produced in 2002-03, was actually of my mother's death, and called Todes Atem. So I lived through her illness for a long time. She was diagnosed with cancer when I was 8, and she succumbed to the disease when I was 22. So a lot of my early youth upbringing was surrounded with caretaking and illness. And I used art as a vehicle to navigate the pressure. And it was always enmeshed in this very personal space, and it was I guess it was my lifeline. And after producing Woman, Fräulein, Damsel and Me, which was more about my dad's psyche of living in, my dad is an interesting character. So he lived in Germany for 20 years and was very interested in doing politics and all this stuff. And then was kind of, was part of the second wave of the Pan-African movement to move students overseas, to train them overseas and for them to come back home. A lot of them never came back home. He came back home, and he was in the second wave because the first wave was only based on tribalism and only Kikuyus were sent overseas, and he's Kamba. So he had a lot of union work he was doing in his early 20s. He started school 5 years after not doing school in university, so had this massive gap, had this huge language gap. He was in the 60s in Germany doing surgery. So complete rejection, and like I'm Black and I'm Proud, the song by James Brown was like his national anthem, right? But he missed the independence movement in Kenya because he was overseas. Of course, they had their own diasporic movements and activities and political actions. And he went to Germany wanting to do political science, but was laughed at because none of his degrees lined up with that. He was told, no, you do medicine because your certificates don't line up with that. And he came back and built the first pediatric surgery in Kenya that it didn't exist before. And again, he faced a lot of racism back when he moved back home, because he was taking away the jobs from the white surgeons who were general surgeons, who were not pediatric surgeons, who were performing half shoddy jobs on small children because they're not trained to do that. So this huge resistance and this really big romanticization of what independent Kenya is and should be. To this day, he's upset about the direction the country's in, and the ideology he had built around what independent Kenya should be. So this work deals with his kind of psychosis, and me and my sisters growing up in this, oh, one time it's traditional rules, oh, another time it's like pretend neoliberal 70s German rules. It's like, oh, can you please decide how you're bringing us up, you know, which one, you can't pick and choose what works for you.
But I have to ask you though, predominantly your childhood, was it, when you brought up, it was mostly in Kenya?
Born and raised in Kenya.
Okay.
So that work deals with this psychology, and my sisters and me navigating this. And I feel like I had to do those two bodies of work in order to get into doing bodies of work that were, yes, they still have a thread in the autobiographical, but they're not positioned solely in the autobiographical. And they're political situations, that how politics and public things are affecting us privately. And this universal themes that people can all navigate and hang on to. And that's really the how I've ended up where I am. But I don't even, the only thing I can say, I'm not sure if I'd be doing art if I was purely white. Who the hell knows? But I can't answer that. It's a belief that makes no sense for me.
Okay, I'm going to move to Dr. Pure.
Okay.
Your upbringing in the UK, let's say, for instance, you never was there and you lived solely in Kano all your life. As an artist, do you think you would have the audacity to, produce the kind of music you're producing now?
Yeah, nah, you know what? I think in my pieces, there's certain parts where I was speaking Hausa. So I think I should tell you maybe a little what I was saying in those.
Please,
parts. Yes. Basically, they were from shows, and the first one where I was, with the microphone in front of it, it was a TV station that had come to my first event after Boko Haram insurgency had ended, or shall I say had, reduced in Kano. And so basically, I was just saying that, in the past, we had been told that we could not do it, or we cannot do it right. And here we are doing it. So basically, everywhere you hear me talking, it's just me basically trying to encourage the younger ones and the youth to do what they believe is right, and, to do what makes them happy. Because, growing up in the UK, obviously, UK, especially London, and London has its crimes, the gangs, the drugs and everything. So growing up in the UK, and I was raised by a single mother, by the way, and may her soul rest in peace. She was a warrior. I was raised by a warrior. There was boys, there was many of us, and 6 of us, and 4 of us were boys. And trust me, we were a handful. But, the community centers in our areas, and I grew up in Newham, East London. The community centers were like safe havens for us. They were a place to escape from all of the crime, the robberies, the drugs and everything. So when I came to Nigeria, and I thought to myself, I used to run away to the, community centers, do my music, record my music. And it was a way to put a smile on my face through all of the struggle and all of the pain. So, with the community centers, they had, the anger management classes, the psychiatrists, the whatever. So, I used to have a big issue with my anger and everything. So everything, and all of the knowledge I had there, I tried to impact onto the younger lot here, even though we have been trying to do a youth center in Kano, which we have not succeeded yet, but we're going to get there. So if, for example, now I was, in Kano, and I'd grown up in Kano, and I'd never been to the UK and never had that knowledge, I think I would have stopped doing music a long time ago. And the reason why I say this is because when Sharia law was first introduced to Kano State, and and everybody was hot-headed, and everybody was, yes, Sharia law, Sharia law. We had these police called Hizbah, and they basically oversee, and any laws that are infringed upon, Sharia laws, that is. So that time when I used to have my DJ equipment, and I used to have my crew. And so every weekend we'll go to events, weddings and stuff like that. We'll play our music and we'll make a little money. So it was a way of getting, because there's a lot of young people that I know that are addicted to drugs, and addicted to crack cocaine, addicted to heroin. So, young artists like that, and what we do is we try and give them a means of income. And so at that time, we were using the DJ equipment. We'll go, and Africans, we love to spray money. So we made a lot of money, and and we'll share it out between ourselves. At least every weekend, we'll give them something to do. But that time, Hizbah used to come and they used to confiscate our equipment, and they used to whip us. They used to beat us. And at that time, there was a time where I got beaten, seriously beaten. Like I couldn't lay on my back, couldn't lay on my side. And I would sit up at night crying and thinking to myself, you know what, I'm not doing music anymore. Is it really worth it? I've had enough. I'm not doing it anymore. But then, I would remember back to when I was growing up, and I think to myself, and how many people suffered so that we would have a good life, growing up in the UK. I'm saying? So what's the big deal? I can suffer a little more if it means, there's some other people that will come up and not have to go through what we went through. So what I did was I went, met with Hizbah, sat down with them, and I was like, where your kids, where your children, your grandchildren, what don't you want us to do? We will not do it. Do you understand? But don't stop us from doing what makes us happy. Don't stop us from doing what keeps us off the streets, keeps us, and so it got to a point where, and they said, okay, you can do it, but don't mingle the boys and the girls. Boys on this side, girls on that side. And a lot of people are like, no, don't agree to it. From when you start agreeing, well, but I said to them, you know what, let's just do it, And as time goes on, now we've started, one guy will go into the women's section, one babe will go into the guys section, and now we mingle and it's not a big deal. So that's the reason why I told you things are getting better. And now they don't hit anybody, they don't whip anybody. Now they're more civil. And I think the reason why is because I went and I actually sat down and I spoke with them, even though it's not that easy and not everybody can do that. And I think if I had not grown up in the UK and maybe not had that independence, met a lot of independent people, traveled around the world, then
could have been different.
I don't know. Because funny enough, I'm related to the Kano monarchy. Yes, I'm related to them. So, I will have that, family control. As soon as I come out to say I'm going to be a rapper, I've got a lot of family members with their turbans, they'll be like, no, not in this family. You belong to this family. Do you belong to this royal family? It's going to be embarrassing. And it's not that I didn't have it this time around. I had it this time around. But what I did was, I went and I met the Emir of Kano, the King of Kano. I met him. I spoke to him. I said, there's a lot of people in the royal family that are, looking down on us. And this is basically what I want to do. So he said to me, rap for me. And that's what I did. I rapped one verse for him, and I made sure I rapped the most conscious verse that I could find. I rapped the conscious verse, and it was like, that verse was beautiful. He was like, it's very poetic. He was like, we have an event next week, and can you come along with your guys, and come and perform in front of everybody? And I think maybe if you guys do that, then you'll get a stamp of approval, and maybe the rest of all the kingmakers will leave you guys alone. And that's what we did. We performed in front of them. And, they were embarrassed because most of the things that they were saying negative about us, we proved them wrong, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes,
so I think if I would have been Dr. Pure, the 100% born and raised in Kano, I think I would not have reached this point. To be honest,
your story is everything that we were looking for this year. You resisted, you reimagined a way to communicate and to integrate with society, and you restored. But I would like to throw this to Ayo, who's dealt with a number of artists in Nigeria who have not had the same privileges that you've had. And I know that Ayo has been an advocate for tons of, especially musicians, if I'm correct, Ayo. Can you say something about that? And I know that Michael has one or two thoughts on this issue as well. But Ayo, I want you to relate to how both Dr. Pio and Soria's work has been perceived by you, and how it would be in Nigeria as a totality if Soya was a Nigerian practicing the same type of art. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jude. Yeah. Can you hear me? Jude, don't forget that I'm also an artist. You know, I am a drummer. And,
I apologize. Are you the artist as well?
I started doing what I'm doing in terms of defending artistic freedom when in 2012, where we had a massive protest using music. That was one of the first successful times that music was used as a peaceful tool of resistance against oppression in Nigeria. A massive stage was erected in Lagos at Ojota, which is today called Gani Fawehinmi Park. And when the response was massive, gaining international media attention, then soldiers were deployed. My group, the Talking Drum Ambassadors, were prevented from performing. Everybody was driven away with koboko and guns. You know, that was what informed my decision to dedicate my career to defending artistic freedom. So here is the narrative. I want to start from Syowia. I hope I'm able to pronounce it correctly this year. You know, I've walked across the continent, and you know, Syowia's work, you know, the central character of our work lives in her. So as you can see from what we saw, the energy, one of the pieces that we saw, the quote from the daughter of one of the victims of atrocities of the German colonial masters, you know, that work is seen as promoting revenge. So here, that's the narrative. Syowia is promoting revenge. Syowia is bringing the memories of the pains of the past. Syowia is igniting or reigniting the feeling of revenge, the feelings of having to, you know, to right the wrong of the past. So, you know, our heart is dangerous. Dr. Pio is bringing westernized culture, encouraging young people to you know, promoting immorality, you know, encouraging boys and girls to mix together, which is against Islam. You know, Kano is a very Islamic society. You know, these are all the narratives that, you know, government, state and non-state actors, you know, put out there to justify why there should be agencies set up to regulate the arts. You know, for instance, in Nigeria, we have census boards, not just at federal level, but also at state levels. Some states have, some don't have. We have the Sharia legal system in at least 12 states of northern Nigeria, 12 out of 19 states in northern Nigeria. You know, the Sharia laws influence the censorship rules, which prevent men and women mixing together in any gathering. You know, it's even for a woman to be singing, you know, or a woman to cuddle another woman. So, hello?
Yes, you're a bit muffled.
Okay, so for the sake of time, I just want to commend Syowia and Dr. Pio for the years of resistance and for keeping it real and for following their passion and making society better for it. The narratives are there always to discourage, you know, what art is powerful. Art is a very, very powerful tool of change because emotions are involved, mobilizations are involved, whether it's visual art, as we can see from Syowia's work, whether it's performing art or music, as we can see from Dr. Pio's work. Arts are very, very powerful. And, you know, in our part of the the world, they just have to be controlled. Otherwise, people will lose power. You know, politicians will lose their influence because people will be awakened to fight for their rights.
That's why art is viewed as dangerous.
I feel like you've tapped into something because it's the senses, right? All 5 senses are being activated.
Exactly.
And there's an underestimation in the power of those senses, sensory knowledge and body knowledge. And that power is really underestimated. Oh, well, maybe it's systematically underestimated because we know it's very powerful. And, you know, the way a mob can move in the space, it's like you become part of a frenzy. You don't really know why you behaved that way. You were feeling other people, right?
But I do think so. I do think so. It's everything. It's how you perceive, how you sense.
Different cultures, different ways. You know, in Mexico, they have the ate, oh, I went and partied and did all sorts of bad things, but please, you know, you're forgiven because it was not your spirit. It is a spirit that entered you. And it's the same with the Greeks, you know, but there's something, I think music is probably the most powerful in that sense because it is so immediate.
In my culture, the talking drums can be used to invoke the spirit of the ancestors. Exactly. So even if you don't intend to abuse the government, you know, if your drummer incites that,
there's a spirit, there's a rhythm connected to the body, connected to the heart, connected to frequencies, and that's just enormously powerful. Sorry, that's what I wanted to say.
You know, it's wonderful you added that. But now to Michael. Michael has one or two comments or insights, because I know I spoke to you, Michael, earlier before we started. So the floor is yours, Michael.
Okay, thanks for a really fascinating discussion. It intrigues me that although I suppose Syowia and Saifullah are kind of to a degree addressing different audiences, that you're kind of standing back to back within the same circle, because there is this long shadow of colonialism that affects everything that we do, and that is in some ways only now beginning to be really tackled at an international level. It just really struck me
Michael, can you say that again? We lost you for a second.
Work on the Namibian genocide, for instance. Sorry. Yeah, I see my connection's a little unstable. I can't improve Namibian genocide. That there are now finally moves to try and grapple with this to a degree, very controversial. The German government has said it will donate 30 million euros in government. The affected communities, Herero, Nama, and others, the leadership is saying, but you haven't consulted with us. This has been done over our head, and aid is not recompense for the genocide. But wherever you go around the world, whether it's people talking about indigenous children dying in acculturation schools in Canada over a 100-year period, whether we're talking about the Jesuit order in the United States now putting up a kind of a restitution fund for descendants of their slaves when they built things like Georgetown University and all this kind of, all of a sudden there's a very distinct new mood internationally around these kind of issues, because there's a recognition finally that we still live under the shadow of these things. I'm particularly fascinated by the Kenyan torture chambers, because a lot of my work is dealing with, both as a writer and as somebody who's now moving into film and other interpretive, interlocutive disciplines, is dealing with the disappeared, people who've been disappeared by various regimes. And I automatically thought, because of course Safe Havens this year is in Latin America, I immediately thought, when you talked about the mothers' protest, of course, of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, where so many people were disappeared. And my work currently deals with connections between the Argentine military junta of 76 to 83 with the apartheid state and those kind of influences. And both of these polecat regimes were disappearing people. And no doubt people disappeared in Kenya as well, and many other places. And that's the basis of another project that I'm working on. So there are just so many connections here. For Saifullah, Dr. Pure, loved your music videos, particularly the one that you kick off with that fisheye lens that reminds me of Le Petit Prince, the little prince standing on his little miniature world out in space. Just really looked amazing. But I think one of the most interesting things that came across in our preparatory discussions for the session was how you were saying that now you literally get young Muslim Hausa girls coming on the radio station and rapping in that way, which is completely unprecedented. I'm particularly intrigued by your approach, dealing directly with the authorities, with the Hizbah police, dealing with the Amir, and that very amusing anecdote of yours saying that you got into the prison because some of the prison guards were fans. I mean, we've seen this in Nigeria. I mean, this relates exactly to your comments of art being universal language, right? We've seen a very radical young arts collective in High Flats in Harare. Very political, very sort of anti the regime and all the rest, but the regime didn't really want to touch them because they're too popular. And every now and again, of course, if they have a show, they know that there are intelligence agents in the audience, and they've turned these guys into fans. It's bizarre, but this is real life, and real life finds a way to grow up through the cracks, regardless of how paved over the society seems to be. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to make those.
Thank you so much.
Kind of responses to your works and your narratives around these. Thank you so much.
Well, before we end up, we have another guest here, Sve. I don't know if Sve wants to add anything to this.
Hello. It has just been wonderful listening to you and really inspiring. So I'm here to have more insight specifically to the Nigerian situation. Primus has been campaigning and advocating for several musicians in Nigeria over the years. So I'm here to learn more and get more insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank our two speakers, Syowia and Dr. Pure. Your work has been really inspiring. Your stories and narratives has been so enriching as well. And I feel totally inspired by you. And like I said earlier, both of you embodied the theme of this year's Safe Havens. And would like to thank you and hope that you keep producing and keep resisting. And to both Michael and Ayo, who have also helped put this together, I would like to say thank you very much. And let's go back and enjoy the rest of the safe havens and the weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
All righty, bye.
Thank you so much.
Hi.